My name is Anthony Colombo. I'm a criminal defense attorney and a board member of the Italian American Civil Rights League.
My name is Don Capria, author of Colombo, the Unsolved Murder, and you are watching the Italian American Podcast.
See that you're born an Italian if you want your life to be great. See that you're born an Italiano and your life will be great.
How about some Donadell?
That's a nice.
Hey there, Paisani, and welcome back to another episode of the Italian American Podcast. I'm John Viola, along with my partner in crime, the notorious P.O.B., Patrick O'Boyle. We are here at the corner of Mulberry and Grand, the heart of Little Italy, Red Sauce Studios at the crossroads of Italian America, coming to you with another week of Italian American heritage, history, and hilarity. Your favorite podcast, the Italian American Podcast. Thank you for listening, watching on YouTube. Give us a like, give us a subscription, and follow along. If you're new here, welcome to the oldest Italian American podcast in the country, and one that has a deep archive of something approaching 400 plus episodes at this point. And today we are going to reference a few of those episodes. I highly recommend you go back and listen to them. Those are pre-video days when we were still
on radio.
On the radio in the old days. Absolutely, our radio adventures. So
Can we get people to listen? The speaker as like an old.
Like a gramophone or a
go,
Victrola? Yeah, why not?
Not a gramophone.
Imagine our voice coming out of that big horn.
Like an early Marconi type radio.
Yeah,
to listen to a podcast, because it would be a nice piece of furniture in the house. But then we went to TV. And
I want to go on a complete tangent, although that's what our show is all about. I've got two great guests to introduce. One's a return guest, but I will say radio is a big part. I love radio. I've always loved radio. But every time I see an old vintage radio, I think of my great-grandfather. My mom's grandfather went to Sicily for the first time. He's the oldest branch of the family in America, was born here, 1900 or something like that. And he finally, in older age, my great-grandmother was born in Sicily. They got married. Yeah, my grandfather, Michele, his father, Gaetano, was actually born here. His father came in the 1890s. He's the oldest American branch of my family. So he marries my great-grandmother. She came from Sicily, came over when she was a teenager, and she takes him back to see her siblings. It's the first time he's ever left, I think, Brooklyn, let alone, or New York at that point. They were in Queens. This is the 70s. He comes home and she's got all the jewelry she smuggled in her brassiere and everything they wanted to bring back, and plants and this and that.
That was a big thing years ago.
Big thing, the jewelry, the gold, yeah. And he comes with the box from my grandfather, and he takes out this beautiful old vintage radio. And my grandfather says he's so happy, so excited. He plugs it in. He turns it up and he goes, "You believe this piece of junk? It's supposed to play Italian music." That was his real take on the radio that he bought. It didn't connect to him. He had these great times, and that was my grandfather always tells that story about radio. But that's the art form, and we can't.
I heard. You want to know the radio story? So my cousin's grandmother, she had a lot of stories, and she was born about 1908. And she told me the story about her father was from Palomonte in Salerno. They lived in Jersey City. And her brother, who was the oldest of the family, he went out and bought a radio and brought the radio home. And she goes, when they turned the radio on, they're playing, same thing, playing the music. And her father starts yelling at the radio to change the song, put a different song on. And they're trying to say, "No, Pa, it's not like a telephone. They can't hear what you're saying."
You have this similar story with your grandmother with the wrestling.
I don't know. You're going to have to remind
Did your grandmother like wrestling?
She used to watch.
My grandmother loved wrestling. Italian old ladies loved wrestling.
Our guest here, the reason that Don, you've seen Don Capria before. What's the wrestling story?
There were a few, but yeah, it would have been your great grandmother used to watch wrestling in the 1950s when it was really popular, and there was a lot of shots where it would show the crowd as well, and they were yelling to the wrestlers as they're in the ring doing their thing. So she believed that she could also yell to the rest of the to do something as well. So she would yell at the television, and she thought sometimes if he did something that maybe a crowd person was yelling, that she
mission
made that
accomplished.
reaction. Yeah.
Why not? You know, think about, we were just about the difference in life with our grandparents, right? And I was saying, and it's a great segue into the whole topic of conversation today. I was saying I got a 3.5-year-old daughter and a 3-month-old son, and I'm pretty confident that when they hit the active part of their childhood, it's going to be a lot harder for them to relate to the stuff I did in my leisure time than it was for me to relate to my grandfather. Because my grandfather, even though he grew up in the 20s and 30s, both my grandfathers, one's born 1920, one's born 1935, into Italian neighborhoods in Brooklyn, very poor. But they went out, played stickball, Scalzi, ran around, got in trouble, hurt themselves. Their parents had no idea where they were. I'm 41. I'm probably the last generation that enjoyed that kind of freedom of, like, your parents just let you out the door and then you came back at some point, God willing, right? And now if we don't know where the kids are in the house, we're like running around like crazy people. That's a different world. And I'm really convinced that I'm going to be able to relate better to the experiences my grandfathers had as kids than I will to my own kids and the world that they're in. And that's a fundamentally kind of wiggy prospect.
The gap is growing.
Yeah.
We're paranoid today
Yeah.
in terms of that, because if you think of all of the media that we're consuming constantly, that puts us on edge.
Yeah.
And, you know, I see it with just my daughter, who's 7 years old. She's, you know, you have to force them to connect with other, you know, with other kids. Yeah. And and if you don't force them to connect, then, where we growing up, we didn't need that. I mean, we could meet on the corner. We'd know that everybody was going to be there at 4 o'clock. But getting back to my grandma, that's probably something that my dad told you that he remembers about him in the 50s with his. What I remember from my great grandmother is that she used to hide all my toys and tell me that they would come alive at night, and she had to take them away from me, or else they were gonna kill me at night. That's what I remember. She
That is one of the greatest things that anyone has ever said on this podcast. Because
Trickery.
we were taught to be tricked as a child. They didn't just say, like, no toy for you. I'm going to put it in the box. They would give you a whacked out story.
Yes.
And then you would get paranoid. My grandmother, I used to like when my grandfather got a car with a power window. It was just like in the late 70s, because my grandfather died in 79. I remember playing with it, and my grandmother goes, "Oh, don't put it up or down, because then the cops come and get you."
Sure.
And I was like 17 driving one time, and I was always paranoid of the window. I said, I had like this flashback. I always, as a 17-year-old, I'm like, oh, the cops are going to come and get me.
I still don't turn the
They
lights
couldn't
on in the
say,
car at
"Just don't
night
do it. You're
because
gonna get the
something's going to
cops are
happen
coming
illegal.
in." Right.
Yeah.
I was always under the impression that it was illegal to turn on the
too.
interior light in the car while the car
I
was
feel
Yeah,
bad
it's-
doing it. Even if I'm like an Uber or something, I'm like, I'm sorry, sir. Like, it's a light. That's what it's
Other
there
people
for. You know
did
what?
this to their kids.
I don't think so.
That
No.
came up with the
No.
Midwestern people. I think American people didn't.
I got a lot of flack one time for telling the story about my mother and my aunt making up, and my mom was really upset. So, Nikki, don't run this as a clip, but you know, I was telling a couple times on the air, my mom and my aunt made up this thing called the man with tape, and if we were running around being bad, they'd say the man with tape's going to come and tape your mouth shut and take you. We'd stand still like statues. We'd be petrified, but fear and trickery.
Yeah, well, superstitions, right? I mean, we had to deal with all these superstitions. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't go anywhere else. You know, you had this
That's
ominous.
That's
black-
not. I don't agree. You're trying to. My grandma was screaming. You can come out. Oh, you're gonna die from a wet head when you left the
wet
house.
head, forget a wet
You're gonna
head.
die from indigestion. No, you're giving them too much credit. I think it was like sick, like a power game. Like no, and then because they would see like it was like I got them. That's all right. That's my own.
You might be. You might be
Why,
right.
why did
You
our
might be
grandmothers want to watch wrestling?
right.
Wrestling is the correct term of that generation, right? Why would you want to see? Like they would get excited. My grandmother liked Haystacks Calhoun.
Yeah.
They were watching. I don't know why they were, but Jersey City people were into Haystacks Calhoun. Like, I mean, think about it. Like they were. I don't know. If you take them, people who like to see other people get thrown around when you're in a social security age bracket of your life, it might give you an idea of the.
It's a different world. It's a different culture, a different mentality, and you know, it's the unifier for all of us. I think we had access to those kind of. It's like I don't want to say it's mental warfare. That kind of groupthink is part of what raises you, right? We all share those myths across wherever we grew up, whatever generation. Like, don't turn the light, don't do this. So there's something proven in its
It's-
success,
it's
I guess.
popularized, right? Let's think
Yeah.
about this Santa Claus, the naughty list.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. You're on the naughty
Teach your
list.
Kid, be good or you're not. And you may not use it all year long, but as
Yeah.
it gets closer
I
and
try.
closer,
I try as,
Absolutely,
as
yeah.
much as I can.
But that's
a
a modern thing. Your
Yeah.
grandmother never threatened
No.
Santa Claus. They beat kids. They
No,
had
no, no,
shoes.
no. Yeah.
They threw cups at them.
Spoons,
It was an automatic.
wooden spoons.
Yeah.
You know,
I got
I have a demi-tasse cup like this. She'll deny it. Good thing my mother doesn't listen to the podcast. She threw at me.
I can
And
believe
it
it.
broke it. And I said, I'm having this because my mother's the actress, the great actress.
I'm
So
not
I said,
saying
when
that,
people, I said, I have this for history to know that you aimed it at my head.
Yeah. That's not surprising though. That doesn't.
Do
I
other
don't
people
flinch.
do this?
yeah,
Normal people, like
Like,
Medigam people, I have no idea.
I don't know.
I don't know. I have no idea. How do you describe your family?
I would describe the single word that comes to mind from my grandfather when I think about it is courageous.
Yeah.
Is that, that's the way that I think there was a revelry, or my grandfather was revered in my family. His big picture over our fireplace, memorabilia everywhere. Growing up, I grew up in all of that. And courage is what I would say is the one thing that defines him now, because he had the courage to stand up and say, look, we're not going to do this anymore as a community.
Yeah.
We need to find our voice. And so, yeah, it's a complicated legacy, and one which I think is largely unknown in a negative way in terms of the narrative that's been put forth by mainstream media about my grandfather and what he tried to achieve, what he I think he did achieve, and so it's been tough to grow up in that sense, to have your family's history written by a third party that you have no involvement with, no control over, and no say in. And for a very long time, my family has not wanted to talk about any of these things. And it wasn't until in about 2010 that my father had suffered a series of heart attacks. And he said, I need to memorialize what I lived through, because the information that out there is not correct. It's not positive. It doesn't reflect well on our family. And it doesn't reflect well on our community. And so people need to know what actually happened, what was the truth behind it. And that's when we ultimately partnered with Don to write the book, to largely memorialize many of the positive things that happened during that very short period of time. But yeah, the legacy is complicated, and it's. People think they know me before they even meet me. I would say they see the name, and they think they know everything about you before you even walk in the door, and that's a really difficult thing, I think. But it's almost as if mainstream media has really gaslit not only my family. Like growing up, you question whether these stories are true or not because everybody else is denying them, or in denial about them. And so, it really wasn't until my dad opened up, and you start to hear things, and then you start to research, and you get corroboration, and you start to see these things. And we're still in search of corroboration because of how I think the record has been buried. But it's what I found in doing this, though. It's really cathartic in terms of expressing the history. And it's also really rewarding to meet other people like yourself and your family who was there, who lived it, experienced it, and can talk about it. And so, yeah, it's a complicated legacy, but one which needs to be, I think, memorialized, talked about, re-examined, and looked at with a different perspective, or the myopic perspective that was looked on it in the past. Yeah.
It's funny because when we had Don on the first time, we did 2 episodes about the Civil Rights League, which has been a big piece of history for me. You and I got to meet at the behest of the new refounders of the Rights League, and your family has been so supportive of it, and I was excited to get involved, and I think we came on the board the same day, actually.
Yes.
But it's a very interesting, like those 2 episodes are 2 of my favorite, because you go into this story of such a unique character in our history in your grandfather, because it is the first time, I think, maybe Joe Petrosino, who got involved in the war against the Black Hand and sort of like pounded down the doors of the police force to say like, we need some Italians here who understand this. But like
detective,
yeah,
who was ultimately assassinated himself
in Palermo. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I don't know, between he and your grandfather, anybody else who sort of said like, no, enough is enough. We're going to do our own thing here. And that's rare in our community. We're more like kind of put your head down and like wait until the circumstances get better, I think. And it was in our 2 episodes that I started to really, and obviously from reading the book, suss out this idea that, you know, the title says unsolved murder, but it's really, it's an assassination, right? It's along the lines of all the other ones that get spoken about in American history, particularly American ethnic history. What do you guys want to kind of talk about the difference?
Let me say this. The reason why it's unsolved, we know who shot my grandfather.
Right.
There's no question about that. That Jerome Johnson was the person who pulled the trigger.
Right.
The real question is who was pulling the strings behind the trigger man?
Right.
Right? That's what is unresolved, and that's what's unsolved, and that's what we've been digging about. And there are little pieces of the puzzle that we keep finding, even some today. I mean, one of the things that we pulled today from the National, or from the New York City Archives, was from the Special Operations Unit for the NYPD, which was a parallel program to COINTELPRO. So the NYPD had their own.
Which for the uninitiated, COINTELPRO is the federal counterintelligence program
that was
Thank you.
sought to go after political dissident groups, anybody that was against the national good. They would be investigated, and there was also black bag operations to stop and thwart them. So NYPD had a version.
They
the
had
local version.
They had a parallel version of this, and what their I guess their agenda was to dismantle and eliminate political groups that they saw as diverse, that would undermine the status quo. Okay. And so just today we found a note from one of the detectives in the special unit, and this was after the second Unity Day rally, after my grandfather was shot. And there was always, we know that there were interviews, and there was a young black girl who had taken off, who was ultimately never interviewed, never found. And one of the notes said, young black girl with Jerome Johnson, possibly shot.
Wow.
That the young black girl was possibly shot. Now that's that's a fact that has never surfaced, never been investigated, and it's just no discussion at all, right? And so it's very interesting that these are little things that only as a result of being very tenacious and digging through the record did we get, because most of all of these records are classified, and a lot of the records that when we went through these files today. Some records were removed from the files, which
55 years later, whatever, 54 years later.
And so,
yeah, why? Like
protection of the institution, right? Like same reason why so much of the FBI paperwork is redacted, because it's not a person that's alive that they need to protect. They need to protect the establishment. Then people will start challenging what they're actually doing. I mean, even with the COINTEL operation itself, it was a classified unit, a total clandestine operation, that was only dissolved because protesters went and found out about it in 1971. They raided an FBI field office in Pennsylvania, and when they did, they found some paperwork that was showing that the FBI was doing illegal activities on its citizens. So, if they had never found that, how long would that have gone on? And then to modernize that, you would think, well, if they were doing that in 1971 and they were making paperwork memos and they were making reports based on illegal work that they were doing, what do you think they're doing today?
Yeah.
It's what's the records that we were looking at today actually were buried for 50 years, and so nobody knew about the NYPD Special Operations Unit until a lawsuit in 1972. And that lawsuit went on, I think, until 2017, 2018, until finally the NYPD was ordered to produce the records of the Special Operations Unit, which are still being categorized and organized.
You tell me the lawsuit went on for 50 years, basically?
Yes, yeah, because the NYPD fought that hard and for that long.
Wow.
Refusing to not wanting to produce any of the records associated with any of the activities that the Special Operations Unit was engaged in, because they're investigating domestic political groups, right? That's not what's in their agenda.
Right,
they're not
of course,
supposed to be doing
People
that.
with a point of view.
Yeah,
Right, people with the point of view.
They're not supposed to be doing that, and so they denied it for so long, and so who knows what is out there? We continue to research and to push and to continue to find little pieces of the puzzle, because there's the mainstream narrative has always been it was an organized crime thing. Absolutely false. Not an organized crime thing.
Yeah.
In 50 years, there's no evidence to establish that. And in fact, the NYPD's official conclusion is that discounted that. We have no evidence at this time, in real time, of any organized crime being involved in this. And their conclusion was it was a lone gunman, which
That's insane. Really.
parallels, but I mean, it flies in the face of the evidence that they had at the time, because they knew a conspiracy existed at the time. But there was no evidence that it connected to organized crime. And so it's when you think about this situation with, I think, if you apply critical thinking, and I think you apply any of the training that I have as an attorney, you'll see that the evidence only points in one direction.
That's what the research does. It's not that it gives you the smoking gun, but it allows you to categorically go through all of the different scenarios and eliminate choices.
Yeah.
So once you start eliminating Gallo, you eliminate Gambino, you're really only left with this potential FBI. So what you do is you just go through each category and you start eliminating by the data that you have, that it doesn't become a possibility anymore. So when you eliminate Gallo and you eliminate Gambino, and you eliminate the brat theory or the lone gunman theory, you're left with this potential FBI, CIA conspiracy. And like you were saying, there's all these other assassinations that we've seen in time where, whether it's MLK, RFK, JFK, have all this similar formula.
And the truth is important, not only for my family, because it's had a generational impact on my family.
I can only imagine.
And I could go through that and explain the reason why I feel that way. But it's also had a generational impact on the Italian-American community. Yeah. Because they, in one fell swoop, eliminated really the only individual that had united the Italian-American community and was united with any type of strength. And we know that there's power in unity. Yeah. And you had Italian-Americans at that time speaking with one voice. Yeah. But that was all ended with 3 shots. Done.
Well, and I point out statistically, right? I remember reading I don't know if it's written after the assassination or before. You would know better than me. The Nick Pileggi Red, White, and Greening New York Magazine.
Yes,
it's written after, before. It's written before, right?
Joe's featured in it.
Yeah. And it's this. To me, it's what was formulative in my youth. I stumbled on a copy of it and read it. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. We were this gigantic ethnic group, particularly in the city. We had access to nothing. We were completely left out of everything, right? Educations, right. Things that people we mythologize now, we pushed education. No, we didn't. Nobody pushed education. We were completely, the best you could say about the mainstream is they ignored us, right? And here we were in our neighborhoods. And you go from that of if we only knew the strength of our numbers, particularly in the municipality of this city or municipalities like at Boston, Chicago, any other ethnic group would have walked their way right into the halls of power. And that's not our thing. And here you have finally this clarion call goes up hey guys, we're the gorilla in the room now, and here's what we can do with it, and that's dangerous to the mainstream. That's
yes.
Yeah, you got Nelson Rockefeller wearing a league pin, showing up to
Mayor
events.
Lindsay.
Mayor Lindsay,
Bella Abzug, all of them, everybody stood.
They all came, and this was an organization that was, it just gave birth to itself. And then it has a suspected, mob leader running at the front of it. So why are these guys going to it? Well, they're going to it because the rallies, they're going to it because of the league meetings. It's every Wednesday night they're showing up at the Park Sheridan. There's a line of people waiting to speak to someone to the dais so that they can inform them of a problem that they have. Now, whether this was a bank that canceled their accounts or insurance company that would not insure them because they weren't filling out the paperwork properly, or insurance companies that reneged on paying the money for medical stuff that they were supposed to get. And what they're seeing each week is results. This was a situation where they pushed through the government bureaucracy. They got things done. They had people. They were activists. They were activists that took to the streets. And I know you're very fond of Mario Cuomo, and we talked about. There was this lawyer that walked into a league meeting in 1970 because he was having years of trouble with the city for the 69 Corona homes.
Yep.
And there was no action that was going to take place to save all these Italian Americans and their property against eminent domain. So Cuomo pleads his case for the league, and the league gives him the support, the bodies that were needed to rally to go against, the government downtown, rally in front of City Hall. And the results were that he ends up winning that.
Yeah.
So there's all these small stories that added up to an abundance of work that the league was doing. But in the modern media, because of what they did in that time, all you hear about is, well, it was potentially a front for the mob and they were taking dues. It was a simple narrative that people caught on to really quick instead of doing the work and seeing that, no, this was actually one of the strongest civil rights leagues
in the world, in the country.
In the country.
Yeah, you can't understand the story or the actual story and what happened until you understand two things, because there are two pillars of this story. One is the league, what they did, and the accomplishments they made in a very short period of time, and the assassination. You can't understand one without the other, because the only reason why you have this assassination is because of the dangerousness of the league and that they posed. Yeah. And they weren't only uniting Italian Americans; they were uniting with the Jewish community in the Jewish Defense League and Meyer Kahane, who, by the way, was also assassinated.
Mm-hmm. Gordon Lynch, from Negro.
Yeah, and Gordon Lynch from the Negro represent. He was a very progressive thinker at the time. Uniting, I think, groups that felt disenfranchised, and there was this overwhelming feeling that of these groups that felt disenfranchised that came together, and through a confluence of events, I think with a tremendous amount of support, there was a tremendous amount of success. And we're talking about not only, national with, let's say, everybody knows the shutting down of The Godfather, something like that. But we're talking about community empowerment, where they're actually bringing in people into the league chapters, providing them with education about banking, about financing, about healthcare, about insurance. These were the things that are being taught within the community that empowered the community. And what's really important is we know from Don and I, just from today, and we've always suspected this, with regard to the Special Operations Unit, they had shills, in league chapters and going to league meetings. Wow. And we've confirmed that today because in looking through the files, we actually have league memorabilia, handouts and things like that, actual handouts from 1970, 1971 that they had in their file.
Not only in their file, but on the back of them, they're taking notes on
Taking notes as to what was happening, what was being said, and things like that. So they were aware real time what was happening in the community and the changes that they were trying to, introduce. And I think what really is power is a jealous mistress. And they saw power, I think, being exercised by that community and being led by one man that they already had a target on, right? Yeah. And that's very dangerous for them. Yeah. Very, very dangerous for them. And let me be clear, I've never attempted to whitewash my family's history, okay? Yeah. I think in order for me to be heard with any type of credibility, I have to acknowledge, some of the other relationships that my grandfather had, okay? But regardless of whatever relationships he might have had with organized crime, you have to look at what he attempted to do with the power that he had.
Yes. And
it wasn't to further criminality. Yeah. Okay. It was to empower his community. Ultimately, that's what he was trying to do.
When it comes to the rest of us, it's got to be black and white, right? And so it's like we can't dabble in gray because we haven't somehow earned access to. I don't know what it is, right? But it's like it's easiest way to eliminate us as a threat or us as a collective force. And you're absolutely right. I mean, when you have that kind of power. And one of the things that always bothers me, like I've told you on many occasions, I grew up aware of the league pre-internet because of my grandfather. He was at both Unity days. He was a truck driver, Teamster, and I wear his glasses, right? I went and did everything I could to find the exact pair of glasses. I'm going to send Nikki a picture of me next to him and his. He was John Viola as well. Yeah. My company's named after him, the whole thing. And when I hear people say like, oh, all these 250,000 people showed up because they got strong arms. No. Go look at the pictures or video. The vehemence on the faces of these people. This is a community really just completely dispossessed of any even remote sniff of power and recognition. That's genuine pain and anger in those faces. That's why they're not there because somebody strong armed them to go. Are you kidding me? No. Look at the kids on the shoulders and stuff.
No, what my grandfather had tapped into was a sense of disenfranchisement, right? Was a sense of the discrimination. And that is what he was attempting to do to empower everyone, and they felt that. So the reports of people being strong-armed and everything like that, it's overblown, ridiculous, absurd. It's a false narrative that's put there to discredit the league. And here's something that we came across, doing our research in with FOIA that we received, and we probably only received it because some clerk didn't think to redact it.
Is that right?
So what it was is an FBI report that says that the FBI and the New York Daily News are going to partner to run negative articles about my grandfather and the league to discredit him.
Wow.
Okay, and there's some strong language that the editor uses about my grandfather in the FOIA report. But here we have, a major New York publication partnering with the FBI to intentionally discredit somebody and to vilify somebody.
That's crazy.
And so, and you have to ask, okay, well, why, right? Why? It was because they were scared.
Yeah,
they were scared of the changing of the guard, the changing of the political strength that was being gained. And what I think is really, what is really incredible is that my grandfather went in, right. He had organization, he had financing, right, and he had an ability to communicate. I think within New York to get people to those events, right? Yeah. But it wasn't just him; people had to come, and you didn't strong arm 250,000 people, right? No, you didn't.
Well, I mean, I always tell a story. It's obvious my grandfather meant the world to me. I always tell a story, it's unrelated a little bit, but in World War II, he had to fight through basically right near his hometown. He came over when he was a kid, went in the army, fought through North Africa, through Italy, and was pretty close to his village. And so his mother wrote him saying, like, you gotta, they're starving there, right? He's up in the mountains in Salerno. So he went back and in the middle of the night, took as many rations as he can get his hands on and went. And I always tell that story very proudly. I think that there's people when I've told it who are like, well, so you're saying he just took rations from the U.S. Army? And I'm like, yes, he did. And he fed his starving family and a lot of people who hadn't eaten in weeks and weeks and weeks. And I don't think any soldier starved to death. And like there's some sort of Robin Hoodism to the practicality, I think, of our people and our ideas on the balance of what's just, I think. You know what I mean? And I think that gets lost in a lot of these things.
Yeah, I mean, even the criminal aspects of the Roaring '20s and the heavy immigration of Italian Americans. I don't know if we covered this when we talked a while ago, but you notice that there's all these entrepreneurs that are coming over from Italy and they want to do something here and they have everything that they need to do it, but they just don't have the paperwork to get the small business loan and so on. So what happened when they were turned down by the banks and shunned by corporate America, you had Italian gangsters who had plenty of liquid to furnish them with what they needed. And that's why you saw, flower shops and bread shops and, coffee shops and restaurants and all these different enterprises coming up from these people. And it was all around the banking system. And I think that aggravated a lot.
My aunt was a widow, a war widow, and she was denied a mortgage. She had, I only found this out recently, and I was very, very close. But in Italian families, everything's a secret, so that's not, the FBI, CIA has nothing on my mother's family. But anything. My aunt was getting a war pension. Her husband was killed in combat. She was getting, and she worked 2 jobs. My aunt was a hustler her whole life. And she had 1 son. She was denied a mortgage because she was a woman. That actually happened then, and she was a widow. and my aunt had to go to a loan shark to buy her house. And people, just clarification, because we're going to get a lot of pushback on this episode. We are not condoning any of the terrible things that were done and that surrounded those institutions. And we are not making excuses for it. But what we're saying is that you had a class of people, you had a lot of, like we said, those talented people who, I knew someone who had said this to them, that they had a family member, and that's where I got that theory from. I didn't come out of my head from nowhere. Someone who remained nameless who had a family member who was heavily involved and got in a lot of trouble, and they said he was so smart. If he had an opportunity for education, I don't think it would have happened, because he was frustrated with the blue-collar job that he had.
Yeah.
And the only institution that would let him in, because he was good with numbers and stuff like that, was organized crime. And I'm not trying to exculpate or to take anything away, but we have to understand that it's a complicated societal story. It's a complicated because the media in the movie makes it very black and white, and it wasn't that way. She said my brother wanted so much more, but he didn't have the tools. He knew he had the talent, but he didn't have the education and the tools to get it.
Yes. No, I look at it from a historical perspective, a sociological perspective, to try to understand how these things came about. And you're absolutely right. I mean, somebody like my grandfather, whose father was killed when he was 11 years old, and is now the patriarch of his family, taking care of his mom at 12 years old. What opportunities did he have? He had no formal education, very limited formal education. And so what do you have access to? So he had access to older people, one of which was Carlo Gambino, who saw that he, had intelligence, could organize, put him on the docks, right? And so those are the opportunities that were created then. Because there weren't really any others. So
and to come to some sort of defense in the sense that, so your great grandfather was killed.
Yes.
So your grandfather, as a young boy, had to take care of the family.
Correct.
Growing up with Depression era grandparents, the reason they had Franklin Roosevelt in a saint-like position was relief. My grandma talked about the Depression all the time. Like before government institutions came out, people really did starve. My uncle, during the Depression, my grandma said that there were people in Jersey City underneath the railroad trestle, and they were basically homeless.
Sure.
And my uncle, because we had a fruit and vegetable business, would create crates of food to bring to these people. Maybe a peach that was too old. And people don't realize, I mean, thank God today we have the social services that children get, health care and medicine and formula and stuff like that. But there was a time and place where when you lost the provider for the family, you only had churches and charity.
There was no safety net.
There was no safety net.
Nothing. Think about, even now, like I'm still a member of the Lady of the Snow Society in Brooklyn. You pay a couple $100 a year, whatever, and like you get death benefit. We still have that, right? There's still a death benefit pay in order sons and daughters of Italy in America. Like that's our whole insurance. There's still all this stuff because all we had as a community. That is it.
People would bring, have a mask card and there'd be $100 inside and $50 inside and stuff like that because there's a lot of stuff we take for granted, especially kids who are born in the post 9/11 world, because they grew up in a very different world. That, a lot of when you were down on your luck, you were down on your luck.
Yep.
That's another thing too. Is, in Joe's path, as I look at everything on a timeline, he fights in World War, and while that's happening, there's a lot of things that he's getting information that's happening back in Brooklyn, and we talk about not being able to get the bank loan. Well, Italian Americans, especially those that were born in Italy that were living in America during the time of the war, were looked at as the enemy. I mean, there's flyers, there's posters that were put up. There were people were going into the homes of Italian Americans, taking their radios from them.
It's Proclamation 2527.
Freezing their bank accounts. So here's a guy that's part of the biggest minority fighting for America in the war, but hearing all these stories. So he felt a little disdain for the government when he came back, and getting involved in the rackets, so be it. But in the 1960s, when the Organized Crime Task Force began, their entire mission was to go after Italian American gangsters. There was no other organized crime in their eyes in the country. No German gangsters. There's nothing but the Italian Americans. So, it started for him. Everything was reactionary, right? It wasn't just like he was built into the person he was, whether it was his father dying and then getting involved in that lifestyle. Everything was situational that was happening to him, and then he reacted to that in a certain way. So it's a story.
Yeah,
it's
I think
a legend.
what Don's, he wasn't created in a vacuum. He was an accumulation of his experiences, which I think were the experiences of other Italian Americans within the community growing up with that type of disenfranchisement and that type of prejudice and that type of discrimination. And so there are things throughout our history that we can see, one of which was the enemy alien acts that resulted in the internment of some, Italians. And also, searches and seizures and seizing of property and
even
internment.
Just the rumor of that.
Yeah.
Imagine that today, now.
Yeah, and so, but that progressed to the Kafava hearings, where we had in beginning in 1950, we had, I think, the Red Scare now became the Red, White, and Green Scare, right? I mean, that's really what it turned into. And so you now have this group that, okay, they're the specter behind the government that we need to investigate and eliminate and take down. And I think kind of the culmination of that was the 1967, 1968 task forces, the FBI strike forces that then went into Italian American communities throughout the United States and were very, very heavy-handed. I mean, my mom has told me stories about she'd be walking down, 86th Street going shopping, and they would stop her, and they'd look, they'd stop, they'd pull the, FBI agents would stop her, pull back the blanket on my brother's, in the carriage and say, are there any guns there? You need to pick up the baby. And I mean, this is the type of harassment. Other stories my mom told that young girls in the community would be stopped on their way to school and told to pick up their uniform skirts. I mean, so these are the heavy-handed tactics that the FBI was engaged in at the time, that I think resulted in, it was the catalyst for, I think, my grandfather to say, okay, that's it. We've had enough.
We need to organize.
Yeah.
I have to ask you a question. Because when you came on, it was like 3 years ago now?
Yes,
it was during COVID. The whole premise said, this is crazy. Before you come, I said, this is crazy. Well, John wants it, I'll go ahead with it. And you changed my mind in a second. That's why I was trying to follow up, but you changed my mind in a second because, I have a legal education like you, right? So we see things in a different way.
Yeah.
Right?
We've learned another language.
We've learned another language.
Yeah.
I said, okay, well, number one, what's the motive, right? So you say, okay, the government, this guy was a social, today it's like a political social influence or whatever. I wasn't resonating. And then you said something. You said, the way that your grandfather was killed was not the method of a traditional mob hit. And that you froze me at that moment. I was like, to me, that was the missing point. That changed my entire perspective. So I know that's in the previous, I don't even know because I never listened to an episode. I don't know if that was edited out. Because sometimes we just edit things in a different way. Could you explain to the audience how you came up with that and explain to them the importance that is to this entire narrative? Because that's what turned me around 180.
They used really good positioning to tell and sell that story because it starts with the fact that we have the nickname, which he was never called Crazy Joe Gallo. He was known as Joey the Blonde. It was never uttered Crazy Joe. They called Ubats was just that he was, different, right? Crazy. So you have a guy named Crazy Joe Gallo who they said aligned with blacks while he was in prison and was going to have dealings with them when he came home from prison, right? So that's a narrative that got pushed through the media. Now you have a shooter of Joe Colombo who is an enemy of Joe Gallo, and that shooter is black. So 1 and 1 equals 2, right? We have a guy who aligned himself with blacks in prison, black shooter takes out mob boss, this guy didn't like him, case closed, right? It's a simple story for everyone to digest, and it was. That was as far as they ran with the evidence to all this. There was never any ties of Jerome Johnson or anyone he knew to Joey Gallo, but historically, we had to look at it where analyze shootings all the way up from the dawn of the mafia, right? From the Petrosino days, the Black Hand to 1971. There was never a case where they commissioned a hit, especially on if he was the suspected mob leader of one of the 5 families, where you go outside the family, you grab a black gunman that no one knows, and you entrust him with a weapon in a circle where there's 15,000 people around him, babies, children, women, and all of that, to shoot this guy in the back of the head 3 times, you're telling me that was a commissioned mob hit? Is what everyone wants us to believe, that's who they entrusted to do that hit.
It sounds a little bit like with Sirhan and RFK, right? I mean, like you still can't figure these things out there.
Because you're saying that was never their that's not how they operated.
No, they didn't need to do that. Well, my grandfather could have just been. I mean, if it was Carlo Gambino, he could have brought him. My grandfather was at his house quite often.
A week before.
On Ocean Parkway.
But a week before,
and he could have just invited him to somewhere and
killed him,
and never be seen again. But look here with the Joey Gallo thing is it's a false narrative. But here's the when the legend becomes truth, print the legend. Okay, that's what this is. But let me dismantle that whole organized crime thing very quickly. We're almost 55 years later, right? In 55 years of FBI law enforcement and investigation and how many informants, right? We know everything there is to know about every other mob hit that there is, right? What type of gun, who was there, where they were positioned, everything you could want to know. What has 50 years shed light on anything in relation to this murder, this assassination? None. Okay, nothing. We do know for a fact that the FBI was present. They had multiple surveillance units there. At least one unit that filmed the entire episode from beginning to end. Okay, there were also other media outlets there that filmed it from beginning to end. And we're talking major media outlets: ABC, CBS, NBC, who had all their footage confiscated. Nothing. Okay. We have. When have you ever seen any of that video? You can't. It exists, but they won't declassify it.
Wow.
Why? Are they holding on to it to protect somebody in organized crime? Why would they do that?
Yeah.
Or are they holding on to it to protect someone in law enforcement and at a high level in the government? It's the latter. And the other thing that you have to think of, right? This was in terms of informants, right? If you're going after a boss, you need the permission of the commission, right? Do we have any evidence of that? No, none of that exists. Okay, nothing. In the crowd that day were a number of people who were connected to organized crime, including Russell Bufalino, who was a very powerful, well-respected boss, who was only feet away from my grandfather. Now, if you're organized crime, are you going to unleash this young black guy, 24, 25 years old, with a gun in the crowd with other heavy hitters in the crowd, including their families and their children and their wives? Yeah. Imagine what would happen if multiple people get shot.
That's insane. Really.
It's crazy. And it makes absolutely no sense.
But going to the Gallo thing also, the Crazy Joe thing is that that story sells so well because, there is one mobster who would do it unsanctioned because he's Crazy Joe. Yeah. Okay. When that happened, one of the first people that I interviewed was a President Street guy. I put him in the book, but he remains unnamed. He said that he knew from that camp when that happened that Gallo, and he's quoted somewhere, it wasn't from me, but that black guy just shot me too, because he knew that he was going to be the patsy, the setup for all of that. That that was his doom. They were going to use him as the patsy, and it goes down in history.
And let me say a few other things about Gallo. If you look at his personality, right, he's famous for running around and saying he was part of the barbershop quintet. Okay, now if he's going to claim the murder of Albert Anastasia, the Mad Hatter, right? Why wouldn't he claim this? Okay? Why, if that's his personality, if he's going to claim one very notorious, public execution in the barbershop, why not claim this? And he never did it. And in fact, his bodyguard, Pete the Greek Diopoulos, who cooperated beginning in like 1972, 1973, after Gallo was killed, wrote a book called The Sixth Family. He's in a position to want to sell books. Right? He said this was not Gallo.
Wow.
Okay, so. He could have easily fed to that narrative if there were any truth to it, that we talked about it. This is the planning. This is nothing like that. In fact, he said no. This was not organized crime.
And that's common
So-
practice.
Yeah.
The snitches to
Sure.
even take credit for something. You take a book like I Heard You Paint Houses, Frank Sheeran.
Yeah.
This guy's talking about murders that he never even committed because he knows it helps sell the book.
Yeah, of course.
So it's common practice for an informant who's writing a book to lie so they could say they did more than they actually did, and that's not the case.
Which brings to the point of what we lost when we lost your grandfather and we lost the League, right? Because the idea that the sensationalism of this stuff, because it's tawdry, it's like the wrestling, right? It's the same thing as wrestling.
yeah.
People like this it's masculine soap opera of internecine, and it's hierarchical and it's organized. There's all these things that humans sort of cling to, right? And there's Robin Hoodism, and there's all of this like danger and your foot on the line, right? And so the whole genre attracts people. And it keeps feeding on itself, and and like, with all due respect to the great filmmakers that were behind it, like I watched that Irishman, and I'm like, it's so overdone and so.
It was an awful film.
It was an awful film. I hate to say it, right? I mean, I hope I mean, it wasn't good, and it was tired, and that was one of the great sort of issues and missions, right? Was to say like. These portrayals in these genres, they feed themselves and they become their own thing. And when you lose the League and this awareness of being, for the first time, put your head above the fence and realize that you're the big group, we go right back down to our put your head in the sand people that we naturally are. And what comes in its stead is not a courageous pound your chest, look at us, we're the majority group. And with all due respect to the groups that are there, right? Because before the League, with the exception of the Sinatra attempt in the 60s, which, for reasons, I guess, of trademarking, the American Italian Anti-Defamation League doesn't take off after their big first rally. But before that, you have mutual aid societies, and the Sons of Italy is the largest, right? After that, you get the kind of NIAF, go to Washington, D.C., It's not pound your chest, we're big. It's go in the back doors of power, and let's figure out how we could advocate for them to select an Italian American as vice president, right? Like, let's push on Reagan that when he selects a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, it's not the streets.
It's not the streets, right? It's not the majority. It's not the sort of we're going to do this from the ground up. We're going to trickle in from the back door. That's how I always see it, and that's not to take away from what they've accomplished. But when you look at issues in like a Columbus statue, we become the people of the back door, and we don't have the mechanisms or the awareness as a community. I don't feel. People say all the time, like, why are we not in the streets? Because that class was disrupted by an assassination, and we never picked it up again. That's why we have never been the people to go out and in droves and in power since that day. But 250,000 people were there.
I have another question. Things that I had thought from our last conversation that all these years later I ask you. So if you take the Kennedy assassination, right, and you look at the aftermath, some of the narrative that I read that I said moves me in a certain direction is that RFK had to be removed because he knew who killed his brother, and that if he got into power as president after Lyndon Johnson didn't run in '68, that RFK would be able to right wrongs. So you have to remove him before he gets to office. So if you think that he knew the backstory, RFK, if you want to bifurcate parties, the Russians were also, from what I've read, were very concerned that it was going to be pinned on them, especially with Lee Harvey Oswald's connections with the Soviet Union. So apparently, and I haven't seen any of this, but apparently the Russians did the Soviets did a very thorough job of trying to figure out who killed Kennedy. So my question that goes to the current situation, the current discussion, is the fact that when people like Gallo, right? That's what they were going to pin it on. Am I correct? Crazy Joe Gallo. When those guys said we didn't do this, right? Because I'm assuming the heads of the five families, which they know how their own system works. We didn't do this. They know someone took them out for a reason. Do we know who they thought was behind this?
Yeah.
Well, I'd say collectively within that community, everyone said it's likely a government operation.
It's in print.
Okay.
It's in print.
Yeah, everybody said, and I think that
there was CIA was named. I don't think they understood in 1970. At this point, they didn't know COINTELPRO existed.
Yeah.
But they were already insinuating that it was a black bag government operation. CIA was the thought. The CIA killed Colombo. That was a big narrative in the underworld. Now, fast forward a few months later, They go to this field office in Pennsylvania, and all this COINTELPRO paperwork comes out. They killed Fred Hampton. Like, you start to see that, wait a minute, they actually have an organization that's built specifically for this type of thing.
Yeah.
You know, imagine if it wasn't a field office in PA, a tiny little field office, and they didn't grab only a few.
Imagine if it was a New York office.
Imagine if it was a New York office. And they raided that office, and they had file cabinets filled with paperwork on COINTELPRO, all the stuff that would have went public. Because all that went public was the stuff that these kids found. You know, and these kids were only investigating because they were sick and tired of, at their rallies, the FBI was sending in informants. They were actually going there to find FBI jackets of who were working these rallies for like different types of college events and things, because they were sick of these undercover agents going in there and trying to thwart what they were doing. And that's when they found this paperwork. So again, imagine it was New York City. Imagine it was, you know, a full file drawer filled with COINTELPRO. What would you have seen on Joe Colombo, the League? And there's a very popular top echelon government informant that a lot of the guys in the OC believe was involved in this, which was Greg Scarpa. He had been working with them since the late 1950s. He was a button man informant, top echelon informant, and he was well known. Matter of fact, Mark Wahlberg is making either a movie or a TV series about this right now. He was well known to do black bag operations for the FBI and the CIA, including the Mississippi burning. You guys know the story about the three protesters and down in Mississippi that went missing. They found them dead. Greg Scarpa is the guy, not like the movie depicted where a black guy kidnapped the mayor and tortured him. That was Greg Scarpa. So you have a guy that's already doing this exact stuff. Again, we don't have a smoking gun, but we're just lining up tons of coincidences.
And I'll tell you, here's another coincidence, okay? So Greg Scarpa Sr.'s original handler was an FBI agent named Anthony Colombo, okay, who actually was prosecuted himself for taking bribes and being on the take from likely Scarpa. And he was prosecuted, I think, in 74, 75. And he wrote a book called Brick Agent that's out there. He uses pseudonyms in the book, but it's clear that he's referring to Greg Scarpa Sr. But Anthony Colombo was the supervisor for Lynn Del Vecchio, okay, who's the agent in The Sopranos who slams his hand down. He said, we're going to win this thing. He's the agent in the 90s Third Colombo War that was feeding intel to information or information to Greg Scarpa Sr. where rival gangsters were so he can go and eliminate them. And in fact, Scarpa killed several people that way. So the corruption goes really deep. Yeah. And we see the pattern that's there is that, Villano was working with Scarpa Sr., and then after Villano's gone, then Lynn Del Vecchio now takes, Scarpa over. And all three of those people were in Columbus Circle the day that my grandfather was shot. Wow. All three of them. And in fact, here's something really interesting that again, people don't know about. And this goes to your point about, organized crime and why they wouldn't do this. And one of the narratives was that, well, if it wasn't Joe Gallo alone, because he didn't really have the organizational skills to pull off something like this, there had to be somebody behind him, and it was Carlo Gambino, okay? And Carlo Gambino was behind him, influencing Gallo, and he gave the contract. And Gambino was upset with my grandfather because of his involvement in the League and because of the heat that it was bringing, to organized crime. And interestingly, in the FOIA, Greg Scarpa Sr. tells the FBI that prior to being shot on the second Unity Day rally, my grandfather shared with him that he was going to step down from the League, that he was going to announce in his speech that he was stepping back from the League, and that either my father or Nat Marcone or one of the other members was going to step up to kind of be the head. And so it's interesting that Greg Scarpa Sr. would say that, because if the FBI was aware of this information, right, and Gambino knew from meeting with my grandfather that he was going to step down, and that's what the story that my father has always said, that my grandfather and Gambino met prior to the second Unity Day, and it wasn't because Gambino wanted him to step down because of the heat and that whole story about him spitting in the face of, Gambino. It's complete nonsense. My grandfather actually suffered from Bell's palsy, and it was aggravating that condition. And so Gambino was like a father. Carlo Gambino was like a father figure to my grandfather, and he was worried about my grandfather's health, and he wanted him to step back for those reasons.
Yeah.
Because the truth is that Gambino, from the early 60s, he was indicted in March of 1970, prior to the inception of the league, which came back in May.
They were together
and
at La Stella.
It's a false narrative. When you actually look and examine the facts that are there, with any critical thinking, you see that they're all pointing away from this, this theory of
Gambino.
Organized crime being involved. And you would think, again, that over 50 years, with all the informants that we would have, that there would have been some information that would have come to light to corroborate any of that, and there just hasn't been. And so,
have any other organized crime hits been as redacted as these files? Like,
no, absolutely not.
Why
None.
would you? Why?
None.
That's why. Like,
Want to put it all out
every
there.
other. Right, you want to put it out there, right? That's
None.
so. If you're combating crime, exposing it is a massive part of that mission, right? And so, what are you redacting? That's the ultimate question. And I want to get to kind of how you guys are going to bring this mission to fruition. But I need to ask you first about your story a little bit. I know we've been on a long time, but when I first met you, I assumed you were here, and then all of a sudden you're on the call from San Diego. I'm like, what? What are you doing in San Diego, right? With all due respect to San Diego, great town. The Little Italy, they've done a great job out there.
Yeah.
We
We
had
had
vegan prosciutto. It was disgusting. I've never. That was one of the worst things I ever put in my mouth.
Make that?
No,
Are you
of course
not
not.
vegan? Are
No,
you?
no, I'm not
California
vegan. No.
changes people.
No.
But my assumption is, and you think you expressed me at some point, you went out there really to go your own way, right? I mean, what has your life been like?
I'll tell you. Look, the reason why I ended up in San Diego was because I wanted to escape the stereotype, and I wanted to escape the experiences that I had with the association of my last name, and I thought that I was never going to be given a fair shake pursuing criminal defense work within the New York community. That people on both sides were going to look at me with suspicion, and I experienced that through law school, through internships, things like that. And so I felt that I needed to get away, and I needed to stand on my own 2 feet, and I wanted to transcend my last name, and I wanted my reputation as an attorney to stand on its own. And so it's took me a long time, I think, to feel comfortable with wanting to talk about these things, because I do feel that if you're going to come after me from that angle, you can't.
Right.
Okay, you can't. I have no history like that. I have 25 years under my belt of practicing law with integrity, with honesty, and that nobody can put that type of label on me at this point. And so, I mean, for me, I ended up there. I applied to 3 different. I can tell you, from law school. I graduated with summa cum laude. I did very well, but New York legal aid wasn't interested in me, even though I did everything right. I went down to Miami, and I have family down there, and I was like, they're totally nuts. Even though the Miami-Dade, they offered me a position, I said I can't come here. And then I came to Federal Defenders at the time. Was the only place in the United States where you could go from law school into federal court doing criminal defense work. And so I ended up there. I mean, I tried to get away, I think, as far from New York as I possibly could.
Can't get much
and it
further.
was, Alaska or San Diego, I chose the sun, right? Because, and this gets back to your fig comment, because I'm addicted to figs. Okay, I love figs. Growing up, that's all I would eat, and I could eat 30 of them
What
at
do
a
you do in
shot.
California? You don't wrap fig tree. You don't have a winter. What do you just leave them? They just grow all year?
Yeah, take Italy.
I never thought of that, really.
Yeah. There's a season where they grow,
like any
and the
plant.
season's longer.
But you're not wrapping a fig tree.
No, you're not wrapping a fig tree. You leave it as is. You don't have to wrap it. Yeah. So.
That's California. I have to say, Southern California is paradise. I mean, you have earthquakes and fires and crime, and
But beyond that.
but beyond that, the weather is idyllic.
Squatters.
Do you think did you feel you avoided the stereotypes or the biases? Was it mission accomplished?
Yeah, I really do, because not a lot of people associate, that when somebody would hear my last name, they'd immediately, the first association was the show, the
TV
you know, the TV show, and that's okay.
The Peter Falk.
Peter Falk. Yeah. And one of the magistrate judges, Judge Pappas, he used to, you know, joke, and he said, "Do you have one last question, Mr. Colombo?" You know, because of the show. But so that's why I ended up, you know, out there, and I'm thankful I did, because, you know, I went there alone with no one. I you know, drove out there with one of my friends from New York in 2001, only a few days before 9/11, and I never looked back. But I came back to New York very often. I was just, you know, talking to my wife the other day. I said, I said, I don't know how many more times I can do this trip. You know, it's probably over 100 times that I've gone from San Diego to here.
Trip.
But it's a great part of the country. It does have actually a strong Italian American community, a strong, you know, Italian American presence. People aren't really aware of that, but Little Italy is, you know, the most popular destination in I think downtown San Diego
the best
right
vegan
now.
prosciutto in the world.
Have you ever
I
had
can't
that? You know the
support
restaurant I'm talking
that?
about?
No.
It was 1840 something.
I forget.
It was a very nice restaurant. It was all vegan Italian.
Oh, Civica.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they did a great job. I was
yeah.
really impressed, but they
Yeah.
did lose me at the vegan.
Yeah, no, I've never had.
That's-
No, that's not for me.
Let's not try to
can't-
replace cured meats with vegan. It just, you
look,
know.
there are parts of, I think, your Italian heritage that you're never going to let go of, and eating
Cured meats
prosciutto
is
is
probably
one
one
of
Yeah,
them.
that's up there for me. I don't care what they teach you about salt, cholesterol.
Yeah.
But you've done that. You built a life, but you have come back to this cause in this case.
Well, because it's always been in there. My heart has always had this yearning to, I think, right or wrong.
Yeah.
To demonstrate that there was an injustice done, not just for my grandfather, but for the Italian American community. And as you said, growing up, that issue of New York Magazine, I had that too. Okay, and as a little kid, I would read not only that, but everything that was around the house. So it was there. It's within my soul.
Yeah.
I think. And I'm happy to do it, and I'm very happy to have a chance to have the legacy, I guess, re-examined and supported in a sense, and so we'll see where it goes, and I think it's already off to a good start, and it's moving in a positive direction, thankfully for people like you that are willing to listen to the other side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I feel, as I've said many times, the league had the potential to be so transformative for us, and in the instances that it succeeded in the brief 2 years, it did a lot of impactful good, particularly the idea of local stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, again, that's a model that people don't talk about, but I feel, having been a professional Italian American for 20 something years, we lost something in our trajectory that other communities have had when we lost the league, and it's been on my mind for all these years. So I'm happy to be a part of it.
So it's an Italian-American organization, Italian-American issue. If you want to think about the league, organized crime, the circle of this. But to get back to the Pandora's box that you've opened, have other groups who are not Italian, whether it be a civil rights organization or an ethnicity, has anyone else come to you and said, I don't buy the Joe Gallo narrative. I think there's more here.
Well, I mean, one of the people that I spent a lot of time corresponding with while I was working on the book was a professor out of Harvard, T. Grace Atkinson. And she was probably one of the first radical women libs activists in the country. And she marched with the Panthers. She's been through it all in the 1960s. And, she really opened my eyes to things that COINTELPRO was more the zeitgeist of what was going on with the civil rights movement and how the government was involved. And after, I didn't know about the Fred Hampton murder. I didn't know, what was really happening against all of these organizations. So, when you have a college professor who's very well versed in government operation, speaking to you and telling you that she firmly believes this was she was very convincing. The math that she was showing me was very convincing. So I think it's the most intelligent person that I've had break down the Colombo assassination plot and show me why she would agree with that. It would have been T. Grace. I have to really.
I think that there's a tremendous amount of resistance to an alternative narrative to the Joe Gallo, only because they were so successful.
Yeah.
In pursuing that narrative and putting it out there. I mean, when you look at if you look at, and I've looked at every publication, okay, that has something about my family, about my grandfather, and if you look at it, it's the same paragraph, almost the same exact paragraph that's there in almost every publication, and it's to the point where even to this day, I think, like the History Channel with their most recent documentary, there's a few, I think, very interesting things that were said on that documentary, but they whitewashed it. They pursued the whole, the whole Gallo narrative, and had no interest in examining anything else. And you have to ask yourself why. There was
no research done. They took a story that was 40, 50 years old, and they put it into a 4K camera and said, "Here you go."
And when you look at the tapes from the league meetings, okay, that we have that people haven't seen, it's very diverse. You'll see African Americans there. You'll see Hispanics, women. Okay, the league was big into promoting women. I think 200 of the captains were in the chapters around New York were women. So these are the type of things, and you had FBI agents and special operations unit from the NYPD there seeing these things, witnessing them in real time, and then reporting back. And maybe those agents couldn't understand what was happening, in terms of on a macro level, let's say, but other people could see that. Okay, there's a seismic shift here that's about to occur, and if we don't chop the head off of the snake, we're gonna have a problem. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I'm thinking. My because my brain is like, so you need like motive, right? So we took care of like what to me, the things that raise your flags of why this would not be a mafia hit. But motive, you're saying that all of a sudden you have a social movement.
Yes. Yeah.
In the United States that could disrupt, you're in the midst of, so this was like 1970?
Yeah, 1971.
Right, you're in the midst of the chaos of the Vietnam War.
Yep.
Right? Kent State's around then? Like, I mean, you have the flow of 68 and
that's dominoes.
revolution. You have so much going on, and then you have another.
It's everything. It's all of this.
And the ethnics. Yeah. Right? So you figure like the I-95 corridor we talk about, or the Rust Belt, the Catholic World War II ethnics, right? They're kind of a stable part of America and the Democratic Party, and they vote, Now all of a sudden you have an organization that's picking at them and their engagement. Yeah. You think about it, and it gives you a lot to think about. There's a lot to digest here.
I mean John Mitchell, the Attorney General, right? The United States of America had to make a public statement because of the league's first rally that they were going to take words out of law enforcement memorandum. I would have loved to have been the fly on the wall when he and Nixon were having the conversation that they were going to have to make this announcement at the hands of Joe Colombo. They knew where this was coming from.
Where are those Nixon tapes? That'd be fantastic. He was not too generous in his description of Italian Americans, anything I've heard anyway.
He doesn't talk really. Nixon was not a positive guy.
No,
I mean, did you ever Nixon tape where he said, that guy's fantastic?
No,
he's great.
So they were here. They were not only just scared of this seismic shift, I think potentially in political alignments and things like that. I think what they saw was they saw a Malcolm X, a Martin Luther King who had white skin and who had organization and financing already built in, right? Because the league was able to do in a year period what I think took the civil rights movement 10 years.
It's a great point.
Yeah.
Right? And so, but they were not only worried about that, they also came off of, what do we have? We had the legacy with the Kennedys, right? They were very scared of another, I think John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, because they were created by their father, Joe Kennedy, who had very deep ties in organized crime, okay, as we know.
Yes, absolutely.
And so they were, I think, very scared of another Italian-American Catholic legacy. Yeah. Because my grandfather put my father at the front of everything. If you look at any of the pictures, okay, anything out there, it's very difficult to find a picture of my grandfather without my father next to him, okay? And my father, anyone that any of the powerful figures at the time my grandfather sent my father to meet them. He didn't go meet him himself. He sent my father. And he was doing that, I think, as my father told me, for a reason. Because he wanted my father to go to law school. He wanted my father was a Valley Forge graduate. Very smart, very well-spoken. If you watch any of the Dick Cavett show, he appeared on there. But he wanted my father to go into politics. And that's what he was going to do. And that's what they were really, I think, also scared about, is that legacy, right? Is that, okay, maybe Joe Colombo can't do it because he has these associations, but his children might be able to. And one of the things that people don't know about is that my father said he was an organized crime member, and they sued CBS and won.
And won.
Really?
For defamation. Yes. And so, I think that's all part of it. And look, you had personalities like Kissinger and people who are analyzing these things all day long, the geopolitical landscape, not only internationally, but also domestically, right? And so maybe the investigators at the time, weren't aware, but you had people who could see who had foresight, who had vision, and wanted to, eliminate it.
Yeah.
And they were successful.
Yeah, they
right?
were successful.
They were successful.
But we've been going for a long time, and I don't want to. I mean, we can do this all day, and I hope it's not the last time we'll have these conversations. I know we'll be together at the board meetings at least, but really, first and foremost, the book's still available out there. You can get it anywhere that you buy books, Amazon books or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's very easy. But I'm looking forward to more to come from the two of you together on this this hunt, because it's an important story, not just for you and your family personally, but for all of us. It's a big missing piece of the puzzle. So thank you for coming in.
And not just in the Italian America, of America.
Of
in
America,
general.
absolutely of America.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah. He mentioned it to someone, and the fact that they don't know that there was a man shot in Columbus Circle in front of 15,000 people in 1971, they're like, what?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is part of the lexicon, I think, of American history.
Yeah, and the why is so important, and getting to the truth behind this, I think, is an important search for everybody. And so, thank you for taking the time to come out and be here.
Thank you
for
both.
being back, and
Thank you both.
Thank you both.
I look forward to having you again.
Provoking episode.
Yeah, and if we come to San Diego, we'll come have real prosciutto somewhere. You tell us where you like
there
to
is,
eat.
yes,
And,
we'll get you that and more.
real
Very
prosciutto and
happy.
more in San Diego, and a whole lot more to this story that is going to come over time. I'm quite confident, because these two very brilliant Italian Americans are not going to let go of that bone. They're going to dog their way through to an answer. If you are willing to be a part and want to know more, the book is there, and this is a continuing story. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
See that you're born an Italian. If you want your life to be great, see that you're born an Italiano, and your life will be great. See that you're born an Italiano,